Regards, and welcome to Ryan Rambles You To Rest, the podcast where I talk at length about matters of nearly no urgent need, nor heavy impact on our daily lives, in the interest of helping you there off to a more peaceful state. Well, dear resters, for new visitors to this podcast, there will be little to speak of with respect to time, and I would like to recommend all of you who listen on Spotify, as quite a few more of you have come to the show over the last few months through that platform. Now, for myself and several others of you, it has been a long break since our last visit in the summertime. I have had a very busy fall and winter. Many ups and downs that have interfered with the level of energy it often takes me to share with all of you. In that meantime, I should say that I continue to appreciate your thoughtful comments and ongoing visits together. Because it has been a little while since then, I am a little rusty on the introduction. It is also an anniversary for this modest podcast. January 9th, 2025 marks the 3-year anniversary of our launch. To reflect momentarily, it has been an immense pleasure satisfying the restful needs of so many folks, and I look forward to continuing this endeavor, ideally at a greater frequency. Apropos of our first episode together, I want to share that since it has been the holiday season, there has been a great deal of family and friends, and a handful of gifts, of which one I am extra excited to share with you, the fellow Opus coffee grinder. Yes, after these 3 years past, it has come time to upgrade our grinder situation and share with you the unthrilling technical details of its operation. I am also very excited to share that Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast, now has a store on Shopify. There you will find various apparel and sleep-related items, all with original designs by my partner, who creates all of the artwork for this podcast. So, if you're looking for new pajamas or sleepwear, feel free to visit the Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast, official online store. The two of us have tried out and vetted everything featured on the store. I have at this point taken a number of cozy couch naps with the blanket and pillow combination. The store can be found at www.ryanrambles.myshopify.com. In this episode, we will visit comments from some of our friends in Rester Reflections. Then, I thought I could round up a handful of foods that are best to have someone else prepare. And finally, we will conclude with how to operate the fellow brand Opus model Conical Burr coffee grinder. Before we begin, I would like to recommend that you subscribe to this show on your podcast platform of choice, or YouTube, and YouTube Music. For news and announcements, follow us on Instagram at Ryan Rambles Pod and also on Blue Sky Social. Our soundtrack is by Disparition. Of course, my voice is what you will hear most during this podcast. However, I think it is important to bid a fair tip of the hat to you, dear resters. In Rester Reflections, I will choose from comments on the YouTube channel and share them with you. Normally, these would be recent comments, but because it has been a few minutes since our last visit, some of them are older. I do also have to say, since our last visit, there are quite a few new resters on board, who we all welcome. Your thoughtful comments help to sustain me, and, I hope, your fellow resters. Our first comment is from episode 11, I Scream, in which I assure you I do not scream. It's an episode about iced cream. From episode 11, Jennifer Hazelton says, I absolutely love this podcast. I would love more episodes. I know that these must take a lot of time to make. I am very grateful and appreciative of all the time you put into this. It's a major staple of my nightly routine when I'm having a hard time calming my mind. I hope you're having a wonderful end of summer, and thank you so much. Well, Jennifer, I very much appreciate your thoughts, and I'm sorry that it is now past even the end of autumn and on into winter. And they do take a lot of time. And I am working on ways to produce these more efficiently. Of course, you know I've tried the little naps on YouTube Shorts, and those aren't adequate for a night's sleep, I know that. And last year I tried amiable ambles, which were meant to be unrehearsed, less prepared versions of the show that I might be able to bang out quickly. And it turned out that they weren't super fast. But I promise you, Jennifer, that I am thinking about all the ways I can do this for all of you in a more efficient manner. Because I too have times where it's hard for me to calm my mind, and I agree that it would be ideal to have more of these out there. So, it now being the year 2025, perhaps I will be able to find a new system for you and our other resters. Our next comment is from episode 13, A Classic Ramble. It comes from Brenda Estrada Schmidt, 2123. Brenda writes, I woke up pretty early and decided to listen to you ramble to see if I could get 1 or 2 more hours of sleep. at the 1:15 mark, I chuckled because I thought I hadn't gotten much sleep until I heard you summarize what you had discussed so far and realized I hadn't heard most of it. I also want to add that I enjoy jury duty, the actual process, and the show. The way I see it, if I were ever taken to court, I would want a jury that is of sound mind, and so I want to offer the same. I've been on a jury 3 times, and hope I get picked again someday. Thanks for the rambling. Well, you're welcome, Brenda. Thanks for the comment. I very much appreciate it. I want to tell you, I chose your comment in part because it's very nice, and I like hearing about people's experiences listening to this podcast and falling asleep and waking up. But also because at present I have a looming jury duty summons. It's coming up about a week after this podcast will be released. And I too look forward to visiting the court and participating in the process. I completely agree with you. If you are taken to court or find yourself in that situation, it would be good to have a group of reasonable-minded people such as yourself in the jury box. Now, I've not been chosen before for jury duty. I've gone in and I have gotten all the way to the jury box so that I would be questioned by the attorneys. And that was the last time I went. And then I got dismissed. And they didn't tell me why. And I'll be honest, I was a little bit disappointed because at the time, I had the availability to participate in the process, and I thought that it was a good time for it, and I thought I presented as a reasonable juror, but in the end, they didn't take me, and I went home. I think that was after 2 days of the process. So, oh well, but we will see, because I have another one coming up. And thank you, Brenda, and I will endeavor to share with you my experience if that is something people want to hear about. I think going to jury duty and the courtroom is both sometimes exciting in a certain way, but also exceptionally boring in another because everything takes so long. So perhaps I can share with you this upcoming experience in our next visit. And hopefully our next visit won't be too long after it happens. Our next comment comes from Rester Metadraba. I am very likely mangling that, but I'm going to mangle all of your names. Meta writes, "Hi Ryan, My 10-year-old daughter and I are both big fans of your channel. It's a big help when it comes to turn off, quote, thought noise, end quote, and calm down while learning a thing or two. The only constructive criticism, and it might just be us, but the short jingle in between, quote, chapters, end quote, often wakes us up. Maybe you could go down an octave or two, question mark, shrug. But all in all, as already stated, you have two big fans here in Denmark. Well, thank you, Meta. I know it has been a long time since you left that comment, and I want to know if this episode, to the ears of all of our dear resters, is more soft on the music in between chapters. I definitely have a certain amount of power in making that possible, and not to get too drunk on my own power, but I think turning him down a little bit is totally acceptable and fine. And if that helps you and your possibly now 11-year-old daughter enjoy the podcast, then all the better. After all, I'm here to help you. So let me know, everyone, if you think that the music mix has improved since previous episodes. And thank you, Meta, and your daughter for being big fans of Ryan Rambles You to Rest, a sleep podcast. And now, our final message that comes on episode 14, our last visit, the sandwiches of summer, from GroobTube 23. GroobTube 23 writes, finally, I can rest. Well, Groob, I'm glad that episode 14, the sandwiches of summer, was able to help you to rest. I regret that it has been this much time since the sandwiches of summer, and I do hope that you've been able to find some rest since then. And if not, welcome back. I'm glad you're here. And glad that you can rest again. Now then, I thank you all who take the time to comment, review, subscribe to, and like this podcast wherever you find it. Your interest and support not only warm my heart, but help more resters like yourselves find their way to this channel and podcast. Let us continue our journey. I will say that while there are certain recipes that are relatively simple or arduously enjoyable to prepare yourself, even if you don't realize it at first, there are other foods that are unambiguously best to have someone else prepare for you. Some prep is just too time-consuming for my taste. Some prep generates too much waste. And surely there are many things that are outside of my league as a home cook. And I don't begrudge anyone those arduously enjoyable tasks. Perhaps you like the time-consuming side of things. I admit about myself that my morning routine involves a long endeavor of chore work that is just pleasant for me as arduously enjoyable. In a roundup, I list lethargically and strictly from memory, without notes or preparation, items owing to our topic at hand. Our topic today is simply food items, perhaps entire meals or perhaps certain ingredients that I think are best purchased rather than made from scratch. I will begin now with one of my favorite foods. In fact, there's probably some way of thinking about it that it is my favorite food. And it is a very, very vast genre of food. And so it's not easy to make a perfectly blanket statement on the subject matter. But I will say that I still feel right about beginning a roundup of foods that are better to have someone else prepare for you than to prepare yourself is pasta. Now, I am thinking, to be fair, specifically about the pasta itself. I think all of the noodles and all of the cuisines in all of the world are amazing. And I appreciate the challenge of trying to recreate some of the most beautiful dishes I've eaten from around the world. In fact, just today, my partner made a tom kha that was inspiring. And she used fresh noodles that we purchased from a local store that had been frozen for safekeeping. And therein, I feel like, is the crux, the point that I'm coming to, insofar as I can come to a point this early in a ramble, but to say that she was able to prepare this incredibly delicious soup full of veggies and flavor and coconut milk, and develop those flavors without the further need of pulling the noodles. Fresh pasta is amazing. And learning to make fresh pasta is pretty cool. I recently took an extremely amateur cooking class where the dish that we made was cavatelli and pesto. And to make it as brief of a point as possible, pesto is only maybe 4 or 5 ingredients and can be prepared in a simple food processor or even a blender. And then the cavatelli of northern Italy is an egg-free pasta, at least as it was taught to us, and also relatively easy to make. I did not do the best job making my cavatelli, and that didn't change the fact that at the end of the day I still had some yummy gnocchi-esque noodle things. And pesto is relatively difficult to miss on. It's only a handful of ingredients. I would even include pesto in the list of things that are better prepared by somebody else, but pesto is pretty easy. You just need to have the herb. And the herb can be, frankly, anything. And the rest of it you might actually already have on hand. You might have your oils, salts, peppers, a variety of nut that you might have handy, and some cheese, and you're most of the way there to the pesto. You just need to decide if there's an herb. And really, it's a good thing to choose if you have herbs that are kind of getting on the way out and you have some noodles. You don't even need fresh noodles. But fresh noodles is essentially what I'm saying. Fresh pasta. I will add that I'm really not sure if it would even be appropriate to say that that includes in addition to dried pasta, because as little experience as I have with either creating fresh pasta, supporting the creation of fresh pasta, or the just utilization of fresh pasta, I've never even once thought about creating my own dried pasta. And now that we're here together having this conversation, I'm a little bit curious, to be honest. I prepared a wide gauge rigatoni pasta for Christmas with the family, and I honestly don't know how to make that pasta. And apropos of this segment, it's not that I don't want to know. It's that when you think about when you want to have that pasta, you probably don't want to be making the effort to make that pasta. I watched part of an episode of the Netflix show Chef's Table. This was a few nights ago, and it was the latest series of Chef's Table that's about noodles. And the fellow who was the focus of that specific episode that I watched is a gentleman who has learned about the craft of fresh pasta and pasta making from Italian traditions. And it's an interesting story. It's especially interesting because part of it is a little tragic in that fewer and fewer younger generations are learning how to hand make their pasta. And for context, or at least I feel like what the show was implying by the way that it was edited was that the younger generations aren't learning not so much how to make like tagliatelle or like, strips of pasta, but the art of folding and crimping and basically like designing stuffed pastas is one of the examples, like little tortellinis, things that are traditionally produced by classically like the grandmother in the family, that those are dwindling artisan skills, and that's where I think we should all endeavor to help learn and remember where we are passionate to do so. Things like that. Things that can be lost in time if we aren't part of preserving them. And if it is your love and passion to fold and crimp hundreds of pieces of pasta, then that's your art. But if I was thinking about having dinner one night and I wanted tortellini, I have to be honest. I think it would take too long for me to make enough tortellini even for just the two of us, in addition to the sauce or the sides or the protein or anything else that might come with that dish. And that's part of where I have favor for pasta being best prepared by others. My favorite spaghetti is made with dried pasta, but a sauce that I make myself. So it's not about not preparing anything. It's that fresh pasta itself is time consuming. And depending on where you live or what kind of a grocery you have access to, you may have the ability to simply buy some of the fresh pasta that would work well, should you also endeavor to take all of that other time that you have to make the sauce. And that's sort of where I lean. I lean into, give me my resources and time to produce the sauce, and let a professional make the noodles. And that's most of the time. I will say, if you asked me, would you like to have an evening of making fresh pasta and an original sauce with your partner? Of course I would. But, speaking generally, in a roundup of foods that are best prepared by others, I have to say pasta is at the top of my list. There are noodles I don't even know how they make. And there are so many of them. I grew up with spaghetti, maybe penne. I grew up with some lasagna. And as far as I knew, that's what there was. Now, as I've gotten older, and even going to a non-special grocery store, you can see how much even there is in dried pasta product out there. And that's even usually just looking at Italian food. Here where I live, there's a lot of access to grocery situations of Asian cuisines, which is also just another noodle place. Cow soy, pho, ramen, dumplings of every stripe, chow mein. Once you get into the Asian opportunities, there's just so much more. And that is the thing, is that pasta is global. Global like fried chicken. It's everywhere. And fresh pasta is no doubt better than dried. But even so, in both cases, I would lean toward somebody preparing it for me. I've made chow mein at home a few times, and it has been a boon to have the noodles be fresh noodles. I buy fresh noodles, but being able to focus my attention on the veggies just makes a huge difference psychologically. And I'm, a little on the lazy side, let's be honest. That's part of why we say that these foods are best prepared by others. This is practical. There are professionals, incredible professional people who are dedicated to pasta, to making great pasta. And even if you're not using their noodles, I still think it's to your benefit to focus on the sauce. Artichokes. I'm not sure why artichokes come to mind next, but they do kind of fall into that grand waste category. I suppose that preparing like the steamed artichokes and a dip is a pretty simple process. However, from there, I think if you want to do just about anything with them, it becomes quite a labor. And if somebody's getting artichoke flavor into something that I'm having, I think it would be ideal if they prepared it. A few summers ago, I made an artichoke fettuccine. And it was very, very good. But it took so long to extract artichoke from the artichoke to make the sort of cream of artichoke sauce that I was going after. And I would say that that was kind of a turn-off in terms of attempting to do it again. But it was super tasty, and maybe I'll try it again, but for now, it's too much. It's fair to say that I don't have a lot to add to this. I don't eat a lot of artichokes, so that's part of it too. Perhaps there's cause then to look up other artichoke recipes. Or maybe take an adventure into pickling with artichokes. I do like pickling. It is a longer process than some other foods, depending on how involved you want to be with your pickling. But I do like being able to make my own cucumber-based pickles. I do that every so often. I like to have a supply on hand for if the moment is right to include a pickle. Sometimes that's just a spear on a lunch plate. And I suppose that the breadth of pickling, however, I can see as something that is good for others to prepare for you. I guess we can segue a little bit into pickles. I'm on the fence as to whether I would really list pickles as a squarely best prepared by others, but I will say that when others do it, the variety and creativity and level of perfection by people who really do it as their job or their profession or their passion, that having something pickled by someone who loves to pickle is definitely, at least for me, superior to doing the pickling myself. Since again, I mainly focus on cucumbers. And then sometimes maybe onions or carrots, or I've made a curtido a few times. That is basically a Salvadorian cabbage slaw. And that's delicious because it goes with pupusas, and pupusas are one of the best foods in the world. I realize we've strayed from the artichokes, but pickling and artichokes can go together here. Why not? Why not let them go together? Bread is one of the most important foods. Without bread, we would not have sandwiches. Without bread, we would not have pizza. Without bread, it's hard to think about without bread. Just like without pasta. The flour-based foods. I like to make pizza. I like to make my own pizza at home and my own sauce. And that's something that I developed over the last few years while spending a lot more time at home in the kitchen. I wanted to get to where I could create something resembling a slice of New York pizza in my own kitchen, and reached that point somewhat successfully. That's one of those things where I think it's good to learn how to make some of the things that make you the most happy, even if they're complicated. Although the pizza is not complicated at all. It's really about just finding the recipe and getting the sauce where you want it. And then a few pieces of equipment that are very useful to have, such as the peel to get the pizza off the oven. And then, of course, some people like to use a stone. We have a steel, and the steel works really well. It really conducts the heat because traditionally pizza is cooked at an extremely high temperature and far higher than our home ovens can go. So you really want to blast that heat and have a really hot surface. It cooks in just a few minutes. But that's pizza. Bread, I have not mastered. And where I live, there are a lot of talented bakers and bakeries. San Francisco is the home of Boudin, sourdough bread, and they're kind of the big name in the bakery biz here, and they go all over the place. But we live relatively close to one of the main bakery warehouses for Boudin, and they have a storefront, and you can just walk up any day and get incredibly fresh bread, and they'll slice it there for you if you want it to be sliced. And everyone who listens to this podcast probably has already listened to the episode from a few months ago, the sandwiches of summer, so you know how I feel about sandwiches. Something I haven't truly attempted to master or learn has been the creation of baguettes or rolls. To me, some of the most crucial types of bread. I know that there are so many out there when it comes to baked goods. But I love a hoagie, and I love a good French baguette sandwich. So those are two things that I feel like in their best form are made by others, even if they're mass-produced. Like, as a native of Philadelphia, I appreciate Amoroso rolls, which are traditionally used for hoagies and cheesesteaks, and they are the most widely available Italian roll outside of Philadelphia that fits that bill. And they're even used in Philadelphia, but there's more competition there. Now, back to the baguette thing. I definitely don't know how to do that, but we were recently gifted or hand-me-downed, however you call it, a 3 baguette, like, ceramic bread baking thing. I don't know how to use it. I haven't tried to use it yet. But even the idea that I could learn how to make a French baguette that fits my craving needs, and in a quantity of 3 like that. It has 3 sort of bays for the loaves, and so you do 3 at once. And that sounds about perfect to me, but I haven't tried it yet. And I will say that the availability in my area of a fresh quality baguette is very low. So although I would say that this is still a food best prepared by others, it definitely falls in the category of my interest to attempt to prepare it myself. And maybe I can report back if I have the occasion between now and the next time we're together. But to wrap up bread is great. And my favorite breads I definitely don't make myself. So that's how they fit into this category. Now, if you are a maker of bread and have a passion, I'd love to hear about it. And I think, just to be clear, I'm thinking about bread from a probably sandwich usage standpoint, because I think there's a lot of baked goods like focaccias and things that are fun to make on an occasion, the kind of thing that you would do because you have guests coming or because you just feel like baking something that you enjoy. That makes sense. That's an occasional. But when it comes to day-to-day usage, I cannot imagine, at least for myself, preparing my own bread for everyday sandwiches. Well, let me know if you do. I think it's very interesting, and I would accept any pointers on how to be sort of efficient with the production of homemade bread. Fried chicken. Fried chicken is fairly not something I've really tried to get good at. Truthfully, I don't handle a lot of animal proteins at home. I'm mostly a vegetarian cook. But I do feel that the process of breading and frying is one of those things that's best left to a commercial kitchen. Like, we have an air fryer, and we love it. We got it about a year ago, and we throw stuff in it all the time. So, frying food, so to speak, is awesome. And maybe we can kind of go down that road a little bit in a moment. But to address the fried chicken in the room, there is great fried chicken throughout the world, and different types of batter or coating, sauces, wings, various recipes. You would somewhat generally be letting yourself down if you went to places that are famous for their fried chicken without trying it. And I have found over time that the reason I really like fried chicken is because when it's done perfectly, when the chicken is moist, the coating is crunchy and flavorful, that it's really something. And it's really simple, but I think probably a lot of things that are best prepared by other people are things where the facility is helpful to have. We have an air fryer, but we don't have a deep fryer. I suppose if frying was more a part of our overall lifestyle, we would look in that direction, but it's a food I like to order. It's a food I like to get when traveling, and whether that's kind of the classic American fried chicken or a fried chicken sandwich, which got popular over the last, 10 years or something, or whether it's chicken wings from any variety of places. Just about everywhere has fried chicken, and it's definitely for lack of trying to approximate it at home, but I know somewhat intellectually that it is only an approximation. I have made as a party snack many times, like chicken nuggets made from, plant-based chicken nuggets. And I think it's so much fun to make a sauce for them. We have a local Jewish deli that makes a pickle brine hot sauce. That pickle brine hot sauce might be my favorite hot sauce. Probably is. It's amazing. It's in the realm of Tabasco, but with that little bit of pickly flavor just takes it over the top. And I've made wing sauce with that. That and a great deal of butter. And I suppose it's okay to say fried foods in general. I think that the air fryer gets you pretty close. Fries are always fun with the air fryer. And I do like to roast vegetables with the air fryer instead of the oven. But the proper fried food does, generally speaking, come from a deep fryer. And that's where it's best prepared by others. And I think professionally, because there is a truly world of difference between a perfectly moist, perfectly cooked fried chicken and something that's dried out. Now, if you out there are a fan of fried chicken and make your own fried chicken, that's something I'd like to learn more about. I also very much love curry. And like fried chicken, there are curries around the world. In fact, I would say that probably most of what we've talked about so far, except artichokes specifically, has some analog elsewhere in the world, is important to the culture, is popular. There are amazing curries in so many different places, predominantly in Asian food or Indian food, but it's elsewhere as well. Curry is extremely popular in Europe, the United Kingdom in particular. I think one of the best curries I ever had was off of a Irish Ethiopian food truck. And then, of course, probably on the scale of favorites, I'm a fan of Thai curries, for sure. I think khao soi is one of the most beautiful single dishes out there. And I've made curry. You can make curry. It requires a lot of ingredients and a lot of labor in terms of using the mortar and pestle to make it from scratch. After we went to Thailand, we came home and bought a giant mortar and pestle because the kind that we would have had in the past was too small. For making a curry, you need one of those really big ones. And you need a surface that can hold that heavy mortar, and then also you need to have maybe like understanding neighbors or neighbors that you might be sharing your curry with, because you will be pounding the heck out of it to get that paste into form. The results are amazing, and I think that if there's anything that would edge this slightly off of the list here, it's that you can make your curry in batches and, freeze the cubes, for example. We've done that before. So from a time-consuming point of view, it falls under similar things like sauces and stuff that you make yourself. But the other side of that is that there are so many good varieties of curry. Sometimes you just want a different kind. And some of these are, again, best left to the professionals with the experience to make them, because almost every place or country or tradition of curry that's out there has some kind of difference to it. Even within Thai food, there's red, green, and yellow curries, within which there are further distinctions. And I definitely can't say enough good things about curry overall. Japanese curry, Indian curries. There's so many good curry foods that it's definitely not something you want to go without. And in terms of shortcuts, you can go to specialty grocery stores, or maybe your local major supermarket has a section where they cater to certain specific cuisines, but you can buy curry paste and curry cubes and curry flavoring. And those shortcuts on a kind of practical weeknight point of view are super worth it, because curry has so much flavor that even a kind of boxed curry is still going to be really good with whatever other ingredients you've pulled together. And I guess I'm saying that I'm a fan of the instant curries. But I haven't myself made a curry in a long time. My partner did a few weeks ago. And I wonder if I applied myself a bit more to making curry, if I wouldn't develop that point of view of just make it in larger batches and save it for later. I haven't gotten to that point yet. Although I have gotten to that point with like a red sauce, whether that's the sauce for pizza, which is super simple, barely an inconvenience, or a more complex pasta sauce that has a lot more ingredients. I just like to make a large batch and then save in the freezer portioned out amounts that are good enough for another meal or two. So maybe I could get there on curry, like curry paste specifically. But I just haven't done that yet. Do you make curry? Do you like curry? What's your favorite curry? Let me know. Well, those are a handful of foods that come to mind when I think that I would prefer to have them prepared for me rather than make from scratch myself. We talked about pasta noodles or pasta in general. I think especially stuffed pastas, artichokes, and to some extent pickling, bread, fried chicken and other fried foods, and then curry. I could probably think of a few more, so if you think this subject matter is adequately boring for this podcast and your resting needs, let me know, and I can come back to this in a future episode of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast. What are some foods that you like to have made for you because you find them difficult or time-consuming to prepare on your own? Let me know. Coffee is something that I drink nearly every day. It is part of my morning ritual to prepare it. I brew my coffee extremely weak, so I don't get too jittery or over-caffeinated, and kind of enjoy it throughout the day. We have used a large French press for many years, and a fellow electric kettle, which we also upgraded this holiday to a faster pouring model. Since this podcast launched, I have been using a Bodum Bistro electric coffee grinder. It is the variety of handheld style electric grinder with the spinning Cuisinart/blender-esque blade. It has allowed us to freshly grind our favorite beans from one of several neighborhood roasters in our city for 3 years, and was featured in the very first episode of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast. From a usage standpoint, the Bodum Bistro electric coffee grinder is probably best suited for standard drip brewing rather than the French press. French press, you see, prefers a more coarse grind, which is difficult to achieve with the Bistro. I often do a bit of a half grind until it's part finer and part coarse. It is not uncommon to have an errant whole bean or half bean around. I've never minded this as the coffee is still good, but it is conspicuously imprecise. Now this fellow brand Opus model coffee grinder. This is a Conical Burr grinder. The next level, if you will. This one allows for great precision for specific kinds of brewing, from fine espresso grind all the way to French press and beyond to cold brew. I may soon be inspired to acquire an espresso machine for those moments of caffeine need and flavor interest. In a how-to segment of Ryan Rambles You To Rest, a sleep podcast, I read to you from the packaged instruction most often included with the product that I have acquired recently and put to good use. Good enough use, that is, that I am interested to share its functions with you in the hope that the ongoing dull experience will further carry you into a state of somnambulant torpor. Now I have the Meet Opus by Fellow, a get-to-know-you guide. So we'll start here and see how far it takes us. So this get-to-know-you guide, get-to-know-you space guide is relatively small. It has only really a few pages because there are multiple languages within the book itself. So it may not even take us very long. The cover of the book has a two-dimensional sketch of the grinder, looking at it head-on. It's got sort of an IKEA quality to the look of it. The cover is black and white with red. There is a kind of curly Q red arrow coming out of the top of the coffee grinder. And the coffee grinder itself, if you haven't seen one, is a tower of sorts, kind of like almost a rectangle of a tower, but it's got a cup to catch the ground coffee in. So that's what the front is. And if you haven't seen Fellow, the brand, before, it's just the word Fellow, but the O has a little bow tie underneath it. And then the back of the instruction book has a very peculiar design to it. And I'm not even sure how to describe it or what it is. From a color point of view, it is the red, white, and black. And it's a series of shapes that are overlapping each other. There is like a smiley face emoji, but with no eyes. Although there are two red circles floating near it that could be eyes. And from a certain perspective, that's what that looks like. And then there is a many-sided, almost star shape or gear shape And then there is a teardrop. So this could be, and there's one more opaque red circle, about the same size as what may be eyes. And then there is this red rectangle. And the red rectangle is sort of over top and overlapping the tear shape, the gear shape, and just a little bit of the smiley face with no eyes. And the parts of those shapes that the red rectangle with slightly round edges overlaps creates a negative image of the shape that it's overlapping. So the white gear shape, for example, is a corner of it is black underneath the rectangle. And the very bottom of the teardrop is a black line instead of a thick white line. And the same can be said for the smiley face with either no eyeballs or eyeballs that are floating in space. It is definitely something of a confounding image, and I suppose that there's some kind of possible way to interpret this as a abstract drawing representing the grinding of coffee beans or the creation of coffee and leaving somebody pleasurable on the other side. I feel oddly compelled to keep describing or looking at this picture in the hopes of making sense of it. But I don't know that I can. Perhaps I can share this with all of you on the YouTube community tab or on Instagram, and you can tell me what you think it looks like. It can help me interpret this image. It's very strange. So I think we'll probably just have to leave it at that it's strange. So I'm going to open the book now, and we will begin with the inside left-hand cover. And to describe the way this looks is that there's some simple, maybe Arial font paragraph that's center justified, and then beneath it there is the sort of face-on silhouette drawing, IKEA-esque drawing of our coffee grinder, the Opus, but it's sort of canted a little bit and now has 2 feet that are just 2 little straight lines each. So the feet are just like toothpicky. And it has a word bubble coming out of it. So this is being, the coffee grinder is now anthropomorphized for us here. And so we will see what it says in just a moment. I'm going to begin with reading the paragraph first. It begins, "Who says you can't have it both ways? With Opus, it's more like 41. We've got a grind setting for every coffee you crave, from the finest espresso to the smoothest cold brew. ... and everything in between. It's easy to use, easy to clean, and even easier on the eyes. That's the paragraph. It does strike me as a little odd to talk about a coffee grinder as easy on the eyes, but to speak to that point, I will say that it is a handsome appliance. We have it sitting on the counter, and it looks clean and modern, and almost like a piece of electronic equipment, more so than something that's used in a food prep or food environment. Now, I'm sure you're dying to know what the anthropomorphized Opus Burr Conical Burr coffee grinder is saying. It says, "No one ever says I have a one-track grind." Well, that's clever. So our Opus coffee grinder's got a little bit of a dad joke habit. So I should add that even though I've used this grinder as of this recording multiple times, I have yet to try cleaning it. So I cannot speak to the ease or difficulty of grinding. Oh, okay. So onto the second page. And onto the second page, we're going to continue with the pun. We're gonna keep going with the pun, or we with them are going to continue with the pun. In large capital letters, it says, "Put your grind at ease." And then it says, "With Opus you can, : and we have a list here of 5 capabilities in little sort of gray rectangles, and each capability has a 1 or 2 sentence description and a icon next to it. And so I will describe to you the icon and then read the sentence corresponding to the icon within the gray box, of which there are 5. So the first image, each of these is in a circle, and the first image looks like a showering of particles coming out of like a vent, like in the ceiling maybe. I'm pretty sure this is the open part of the grinder, but it looks like a shower of particles, coarse particles. Not like when you sometimes see water represented in very basic graphic form. Sometimes it's wavy, or sometimes it's straight lines if it's like a stream of water. This is just all little particles, which are presumably coffee grounds. So here is capability number 1 in the Get to know you guide. Grind with precision for every purpose, from a single shot to a 12-cup pot. Well, now we've also got a little bit of rhyming in here, which is interesting. The next icon is it looks like an upside down horseshoe-shaped magnet. And there's little lines coming out of the base of that magnet, suggesting magnetism. The sentence here reads, minimize mess with our anti-static technology and magnetically aligned catch. I will take a beat here to talk about this feature because the two magnetic factors here, I find them to be very interesting and in this case very thoughtful on the part of Fellow to recognize static electricity on the one hand as a pain point with a coffee grinder, and then on the other finding an innovative use of magnetism, the power of magnetism, for features within the coffee grinder itself that are really just quality of life improvements. To give some context to this, the Bodum Bistro electric coffee grinder generated a lot of static electricity. Now, I never shocked myself on it or anything, nothing like that, but the static electricity would attract errant flakes of coffee ground. And so you would really have to take a brush to the coffee grinder when you were done grinding coffee, because not only in the grinder itself, but on the lid of the grinder, there would be clinging coffee particles. And I never thought of it very much. I thought it was odd that they stuck in such a fashion that didn't seem to be related to, adhesiveness, for example. I didn't think until I looked at this quick start guide that I would be, or that I had been dealing with static electricity for so long. So I can attest that the parts of the coffee grinder that I've interacted with in terms of touching the grounds, which is the collecting cup at the bottom, and we'll probably get to the specific name for that in another page or two. But basically, when I go to dump out the grounds from this collection cup, they just fall right out and leave almost none behind. So the brush that I have is almost not necessary anymore. And I don't mind that. From a keeping things clean point of view, it's less annoying in this situation. Now, the other side of this with the magnetism, and why the image of the magnet also makes sense, is that the very lightweight plastic cup that catches the grounds underneath the grinder has some kind of magnet in its base. And so when you go to place it underneath the grinder on the base of the coffee grinder, on the flat base, it magnets into place. It jumps a little bit so that it's in the exact right spot for the coffee grounds to land. And I think that's just super clever. The coffee ground catcher has a bit of a lid to it with an opening so that there's a precise area that the grounds go into rather than all over the place. And this magnet just perfectly guides that cup into place, and I think that's really clever. That's very cool. Whoever thought to do that was very creative. The next icon is an audio icon, the kind that you would be familiar with from maybe your laptop computer or your phone. It's the generic sort of stereo speaker thing with the sound waves that come out like half moon shapes or whatever, little arches. And in this case, the speaker is facing the right side of the page, and the sound waves are coming out of it. The text reads, "Grind quickly and quietly. More delicious coffee with way less noise." I would say that it is quieter than the Bodum. The Bodum had kind of a high-pitched noise to it, and this one is definitely a lower grumble. And it's not very annoying at all. My partner says she didn't even hear it this morning, for example. And it has just a setting where it'll go for about 30 seconds. And that 30 seconds is enough to grind the beans we need for one pot of our extremely weak French press coffee. So I suppose it's way less noise. I haven't measured it. This isn't something I've gone out of the way to vet or confirm, but it does appear to be accurate. Number 4. I'm not sure what this image is. It could be of a cup partially filled with grounds. It could also be a picture of a cup with hot coffee in it, because there are little wavy lines coming out of it. So I'm really not positive, but it reads, "Leave no bean behind thanks to low grind retention." I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure what that means. Low grind retention. Perhaps what that means is that the grinder may keep residue and oils and pieces of coffee left over within the grinder that maybe gets stuck there or something. And that the implication here would be that you get out about as much as you put in, which is something I appreciate them noting here, because when you use the handheld grinder like the Bodum, you can see it with your eyes. You just grind, and then you can brush out everything that's in the grinder, and you're done. You know that you've gotten everything. But this sort of stand grinder that this is has kind of like just a magic place that the beans go into, and then the grounds come out, and you're not really in the process. You don't really see what's happening, and you definitely don't know how much is coming out or how much is staying in. So the implication to me here is that this is saying that most of the coffee that you put in is coming out, and that's reassuring. Now the final icon here is a picture of a wrench, and there is a line through it, like a no, as if this icon says no wrench. And it reads, "Clean and calibrate easily. No tools required." Now this is a plus if it's true, but as I've said, I have not yet attempted to clean, nor have I attempted to calibrate the grinder, and I've never had to calibrate a grinder or think about calibrating a grinder. Until this moment of reading this, I didn't even know that calibrating the grinder would be a thing, something that would be a possible concern of mine. Yet here we are. I am now potentially having to calibrate the grinder in the future. Okay, so that is the 5 capabilities that they wanted us to know about at the beginning. And below those 5 gray boxes is just a note about a 2-year limited warranty if you register your grinder. You can receive an additional year of coverage. Register.fellowproducts.com. And there's some even smaller print that's a little difficult for me to read. It says, available on electric products sold to U.S. customers only. Okay, so that bonus warranty year is U.S. only. Which makes me slightly curious whether the same verbiage is listed in other parts of this book that are in different languages. It would make sense. People speak many different languages in the U.S. It's just a little counterintuitive. So let's move on here. Now this is interesting. There's a 2-page section here. And now realizing that this is not a 3 but a 4-color booklet. So on the left-hand page in black with white lines is a more 3D view of the Opus coffee grinder with 5 different letters with lines drawn from the letters to a specific part of the grinder. And to attempt to describe this image a little bit, or let me come back to that. The other side has the corresponding information with each of those letters, and the title on the top is on a blue stripe in black print, and it says all the right parts. There's definitely a tone of pride built into this instruction booklet. So to describe the image now, the Opus has a rectangular flat bottom, and coming from the back there's a whole box on the back that is presumably power supply and maybe some motors, I'm not sure. And then there's a cylindrical part that's forward on the top. That is where you put the beans in. It has a lid, has some settings, and then between that cylinder and the base is where you put the cup. So it's sort of like a dispenser, like if you put your cup under like a water dispenser or something like that. So there are 5 sections that they're calling attention to, and this is A, B, C, D, and E. And they very practically here start with the top, with A, and then E is at the very bottom of the device. Once again, the section is entitled All the Right Parts. So A, the line is pointing to the very, very top of the coffee grinder, the cylindrical part, and it says single dose load bin. And I will now read the details. Sized just right to maximize bean freshness. No scale? Question mark. Flip the lid over for 20 and 40 gram measuring compartments, or fill the lid to the top for 100 grams. Now, I do want to comment on this because this doesn't tell you some other cool things about the lid. When you open the lid, it has this sort of shallow partition bar, which is the 20 and 40 gram sections. So the lid is divided into, 1/3 and 2/3. And the partition is about half of the lid depth. But what this doesn't say is that the inside of the lid also has recommended grinder number settings for each of the types of coffee that you might be grinding using the adjustment ring, which is our next feature. But it's interesting because you can basically, you don't have to remember what the numbers all mean. You can just look at the lid. And I have found for our French press that the 40 gram measurement, which is 2/3 of the lid, is good for about 1.5 maybe of our very weak brewing needs. So it's almost perfect, to be honest. But yeah, I think our regular dosage, so to speak, is somewhere in between the 20 and the 40. And because this is a relatively quiet grinder, I haven't really resorted to grinding until I fill our jar on the side, which is what I used to do with the Baudoum. With the Baudoum, I would try to avoid having to take the grinder out every day because we stow it in a cabinet. So there's something about this one where it's kind of like, well, it's already out on the counter. So grinding one pot at a time isn't so bad. And if each grind is 1.5 or 1 1/3, then every third or fourth grind, you don't need to do a grind. You've got the leftover grounds from the previous ones to make your newest pot. So B is now the adjustment ring. It is the grind adjustment ring. Rotate to select grind size from fine, parentheses 1, to coarse, parentheses 11. Spinal tap joke. 41 settings in all. The book does not say spinal tap joke. I said spinal tap joke. And the reason that there are 41 settings in all is because there are sub-ticks to each of these numbers. Like you can do like 9.5 or 9 2/3 or something. So now is the C part of the coffee grinder, and this is the largest part of the cylinder in the center of the device. This is the 40 millimeter stainless steel conical burrs. Further text. With unique cutting geometry and grind adjustment architecture. Opus's 6 blades precisely grind for espresso and brewed coffee. And I suppose it's fair to make a side note here that I have regarded the grind as being very precise. As I said before, with the Bodum Bistro, I would sometimes have uneven grinds, and I would essentially, having those grinds uneven on purpose, I would dump them into our jar and then mix everything up or shake everything up to get it somewhat incorporated because of all the different sizes of ground that we had going. But with this one, completely uniform. It's very satisfying to have a pile of grinds resulting from the process that is even. It just looks even. D. D is pointing to what looks like the base of the cup that catches the grinds. And it is labeled as the magnetically aligned catch. Snaps beneath the chute to ensure grounds fall nice and neat. And I mentioned that before, and indeed they do. Although I will admit, one time I pulled the cup out and I somehow ended up with a small pile of grounds at the base of the device. I am very willing to go on the notion that this was probably user error, but it did happen. And then I just needed to brush it off with my brush that I almost certainly at this point don't need, or don't need as much. It's a very satisfying feeling, though, to feel the magnet pull the cup out of your hand. And then the last thing here is E, and it is pointing to the button on the front, which is on the front of the rectangular base. And this says, single short press to grind for 30 seconds. Double short press for 60 seconds. And triple short press for 90 seconds. Long press to grind for a full 2 minutes. When finished, Opus turns itself off automatically. And this is another cool feature. So, for the amount that I need for 1 week, French presses worth is that 40 milligram or 40 gram setting, but that only takes 30 seconds. It takes probably in the neighborhood of 27 or 28 seconds, and you can hear it when the grinder runs out of beans to grind, and it only runs for a moment or two before it automatically shuts off. Even in the only 30-second grind mode, there is something satisfying about being able to set it and forget it, so to speak. And if you were grinding enough beans to go for 2 minutes until it shuts off, then it's really good to be able to set it, walk away, and then come back later. So that was the section, All the Right Parts, covering 5 key parts of the fellow brand Opus Conical Burr coffee grinder. Now we have a kind of graphic flow chart, choose your own adventure section that is called Your Guide to Grind. Sounds naughty. So here we have 2 pages. Page 1 begins with some basic instructions, and then it has underneath those basic instructions steps for brewed coffee, and then on the other page is steps for espresso. And both espresso and brewed coffee have the same first steps. Each of these sections has a number as the steps progress, and each box has an illustration in it. So the first one is an illustration. These are all, by the way, 2-dimensional. The first one shows the portion of the grinder that is there for setting the grind, and it notes that there is a click when the grinder setting is in one of the settings that it's supposed to be in, like the tick marks. And there are arrows noting that you can move the grind dial in either direction and that it will click. And this is step 1. It says, rotate the ring to select your grind size and listen for the click. So that's helpful information. You don't want to just put the grinder at a setting somewhere in the middle somewhere without the click. Then the second box shows the full out view of the entire grinder with the lid floating off of the top, and presumably what are coffee beans falling into the container on the top. And this says, remove the load bin lid and pour your coffee beans in. Then replace the lid. That makes sense. Now from here, there is a red curly arrow that takes us to the second page for espresso, and a blue loopy arrow that sort of loops down to the brewed coffee section. And I will start with the brewed coffee section. This is step 3, and it shows the coffee grinder, and then the best way to describe this is instructions to put the lid on the cup that catches the beans and then put that into the grinder. That's what the flow of arrows suggests, but we will see what the description is now. It says, place the catch lid on the catch and slide it beneath the chute. That sounds about right. Now there is a step 4 that shows 2 images of the full view of the grinder. And the power button is blue, and there are what I presume to be sound lines coming out of the top of the grinder. And then on the other side of that line is the grinder again with no colored in power button and an arrow pointing off of the diagram. This reads, give the power button a short press, or 3. Remove the catch when Opus auto stops. So the cup is called the catch, and I've been calling it the cup this whole time. Now, presumably, we have coffee grounds. So the next image is of what looks like a single cup drip apparatus sitting on top of a coffee cup with a filter in it, and then the catch has little red dots in it, and some of those red dots are sprinkling out into the filter of the coffee. So this is step 5, and this is, by the way, the final step to brewed coffee. And it reads, pour grounds into your favorite brewer and start the brewing process. And then presumably from there you drink your coffee once it's done steeping. So now we can go back to the espresso instructions. Now you'll recall steps 1 and 2 were to set the grind level. And then step 2 was to put the beans in. Now, step 3 on espresso. There's an image of a different catch. There is a picture of an espresso cup thing with the handle. I forget what they're called. I haven't been a barista in 25 years. And it is upside down and pointing at a version of the catch for espresso. And this reads, the portafilter dosing cup converts the catch to be compatible with 54 millimeter and 58 millimeter portafilters. So presumably that's just referencing that the size of the catch adapter is standard to espresso machines. And now there is an image of, I guess this is the portafilter, or it's the portafilter dosing cup, and the dosing cup replaces the lid on the catch. The lid that's normally just a ring that has a hole in it, this is just a smaller, like, cylinder for an espresso amount of coffee. And now we have the image of placing that in the catch and putting the catch in the grinder. And it reads, insert the portafilter dosing cup into the catch and slide it beneath the chute. Step 5. This is similar to step 4 of brewed coffee. That image of two versions of the grinder, one with the power button on and sound coming out of it, and the other that has an arrow pointing off of the box. And it says, give the power button a short press, or 3. Remove catch when Opus auto stops. It's hard for me to imagine that you would be putting it on for 90 seconds. Although maybe there's a 90-second amount of espresso, but that seems extreme. So now 6, we're back to that handling cup device. And that's on all 3 of the following panels. The espresso holder. And this time it's upside down again and showing us that you basically put the filter underneath it, make sure they're together, and then you flip it over so that the espresso pours into the cup for the espresso machine. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Step 6. Place a portafilter firmly on top for the portafilter dosing cup. I guess we're talking about a portafilter instead of whatever I keep saying, the espresso handle cup thing. So place the portafilter on top, and then for step 7, flip it over. And then the instruction reads, flip over, the portafilter will now be upright. So now you've just dumped your espresso into your portafilter and you're ready to go. But the image does show sound coming out of the portafilter dosing cup with an arrow pointing away. It says, tap the catch, then lift it away. Tamp and pull a shot. So there you have your guide to grind. 2-page guide to grind, whether you want to do brewed coffee or espresso. And as I've said, this has got me definitely curious about a modest espresso maker for the house. Let's find out what's next. I think there isn't very much left. Okay, this next section is called Ratio Recommendations. And there is basically just 2 columns here. And then one column is the coffee dosage guide, and the second column is coffee to water guide, which I suppose I could learn a little bit more about, to be honest. And then in between that, then there's another section after that called grind settings. And that's just an illustration of the information that I told you about under the lid. But I'll get to that in a moment. And in between these 2 sections is our anthropomorphized coffee grinder buddy with feet. So the coffee dosage guide says that 18 grams is good for a double espresso. 20 grams is for the fellow Prismo AeroPress attachment. I know not what that means. 25 grams is for AeroPress registered. Don't know that either. 20 grams is pour over for 1. 40 grams is pour over for 2. So we're using less than that 40 grams. That's for pour over for 2 to give you some expressive of how weak our coffee is. And we're not even using all of it to make a pot of French press. So again, I don't mind having light coffee throughout the day. It's sort of the point is to just have a warm drink to stay awake. And then it makes having coffee out kind of more exciting because I get this wow amount of caffeine from just a regular coffee from Starbucks or something like that, or the local cafe. Then 60 grams is French press for 3. I'm assuming that's approximately what it should be. That we use, but we don't. 80 grams is for cold brew. And then 100 grams is for a 12-cup batch brew. I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure that our French press is not 12 cups in size. I think it's less. So we would go somewhere below that. Next up is the coffee to water. It is 1 to 2 for espresso, 1 to 2.5 for the fellow Prismo AeroPress attachment, 1 to 8 for cold brew, 1 to 14 for French press, 1 to 15 for AeroPress, and then 1 to 16 for pour over. Well, that's interesting. I could reverse engineer the amount of coffee I'm making and whether it's what the correct ratio of water to coffee grounds is based on this. Next is our anthropomorphized coffee grinder. It says, get total peace of grind with me. They really like that grind mind pun, don't they? I feel like it's just about the only pun we've encountered is grind and mind. Okay, so now the grind settings, and it shows a chart that includes all of the tick marks from the grind selection ring. And essentially the illustration shows that Espresso is the 1 to 2 range, that Prismo is 2 to 3, that AeroPress is from 2 to 5, pour over is 5 to 9. That looks like it's sort of like whatever your preference is, I suppose. Electric coffee maker and quote cupping is 7 to 9. Espresso, or I'm sorry, French press is 8 to 10. And then cold brew rounds it out at 10 to 11. There's an additional note here that says, for darker roasts, select a higher number within the recommended grind range. So I guess in each case there's subsettings for each area of grind, and on the low end should be a light roast, on the high end should be a dark roast. Now the next section is called Tips and Tricks. And then it appears to have a subtitle, which is Clean and Calibrate with Care. And then there is a further small print that says Treat your Opus right at fellowproducts.com/pages/gear-guides. And then what is below are 5 rectangular boxes that are numbered, and each one has a piece of information in it. So we'll see what we think of these tips and tricks. 1. Don't store beans in Opus. Pour beans into the load bin right before grinding. The fresher the coffee, the better the flavor. Okay. I could see why somebody might store beans in the grinder, just for ease. And I don't think that a 30-second press would grind too much, so I could see where somebody would get the idea. But I'll add that the area that you put the coffee in just isn't that big. Like, you wouldn't be saving storage. It's not like you can pour like a whole pound of coffee in there and then just leave it where it is. It's definitely like a get the beans out of the bag, put them in the grinder situation. So that's a good tip. I think that's a good recommendation, because I could see why somebody would just dump some beans in there and leave them. 2. Dial in your espresso by using the inner ring to make granular grinder adjustments. Visit the gear guide to watch step-by-step instructions at fellowproducts.com/pages/gear-guide-opus. So that's interesting. There's even more granular espresso instructions. That's very fascinating. Unless I get an espresso maker, I'll probably never need to worry about that. But it's good to know that if I went down that road, I could go to fellowproducts.com/pages/gear-guide-opus to get the information that I need. Tip number 3. If your brew tastes sour, go a few clicks finer. If your brew tastes bitter, try using a coarser grind. Well, that's useful information. I definitely don't think that hard about it. I've just always known, because I was taught it from working at a coffee shop, that there's a different grind for every type of coffee preparation. And I retained enough of that knowledge to know that before I even had the Bodum Bistro electric coffee grinder, that when I would go into a coffee shop, I knew to ask for a grind for French press. But I didn't know that the grind would affect the flavor that much in terms of sour or bitter. Perhaps I'll pay a little bit closer attention to this over the next few weeks, and can update you all if I notice the difference by adjusting the grinder settings. On the surface, it sounds like a very useful tip. Four, expand your grind at fellowproducts.com/pages/gear-guides. That's the same link as above that said treat your opus right. I wonder why they put it on the same page twice. But after this it says, find recipes, new brewing methods, and tips from our team of coffee experts. So, on the tips and tricks page, of which there are 5 tips and tricks, tip number 4 is to go online and find more tips. I almost feel like that could have been the final tip, is to say, do you want more? Find more at fellowproducts.com/pages/gear-guides. And our final tip and or trick, number 5. Time your grind! Just press the power button for different timed grinds. Single short press for 30 seconds. Double short press for 60 seconds. Triple short press for 90 seconds. And press and hold for 1 second to grind for 2 minutes. To stop Opus before the timer expires, simply press the power button during operation. Otherwise, Opus will stop automatically. And that's information I feel like we got pretty much already. But I don't believe it told us that pressing the power button again would turn it off if we didn't want it to keep grinding. Now, as I said, the 30-second grind is pretty much perfect for the weak coffee that I make. So I don't really need to know that the button will turn it off. But if I were to grind a larger quantity, that is useful information. And that is the final page in English in the Get to Know You guide. In total, I think we went over about 8 pages. There is French, and that's it. So the book has English and French, and then a very strange abstract image that I will be sure to share with you all on our social media platforms together. So look for it on YouTube and on Instagram, and or if I get over to Blue Sky or Threads. Check whichever one you prefer. So there you have it. That is the fellow brand Opus model Conical Burr coffee grinder. And that is the Get to Know You guide. If you would like to hear more about the fellow brand Opus model Conical Burr coffee grinder, I could read the main instruction manual, which, spoiler alert, the English section is about 4 whole pages longer than this guide was. However, the text is smaller, so we'll get more out of it if we want more. And what do you think about how it operates? And do you drink coffee? If so, what is your preferred preparation method? Do you grind your own beans? Let me know. I think we'll leave it here for this episode. I do hope that you have been adequately rambled to rest and are not hearing what I am saying right now. However, if for some reason you are conscious at this time, I will leave you with these parting words. Educate. Team. Present. Obsequious. Clean. Gaze. Grade. Plucky. Tangy, and late. Thank you again. I am your host, Ryan. Music has been by Disparition. And until we meet again, may your days be stress-free and your night be restful.